Hello, welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and this is a show where you can put our panel of experts to task with your property-related questions. And joining me today is Nikki Reid, founder of Nikki Homes, independent property consultants. Welcome, Nikki.
Thank you.
Hope you had a good trip down from Stratford-on-Avon.
Yes.
Good. Okay. And joining Nikki is Adrian Mcclinton, Principal and Head of Dispute Resolution at EMW Law. Welcome to you, Adrian.
Hello.
Good. Okay, Adrian, we're going to go with you first. And your first question is, given that conveyancing times are still in the 100+ days, I thought it was a bit more than that actually, mainly due to collating information and search delays, what's the most common type of dispute that crops up post-completion?
Well, there's no doubt that conveyancing times are at record levels. I've got personal experience myself. I recently sold a flat and it took up to 13 months for the register to change into the new owner's name. So it is taking a long time, all parts of it. In terms of the most common dispute that I've come across post-completion is normally where the seller of a property has failed to provide full and frank answers to pre-contract inquiries relating to the property.
That's on the standard form.
That's right.
Yeah.
So whether the property is a resi property or commercial, as part of that process, the buyer, via their solicitor, will ask the seller a number of questions. And as you say, they come in a precedent format. And where a seller fails to provide honest, transparent answers to those questions, they can leave themselves open to a claim for misrepresentation, which is in the form of a claim for damages normally. Right. Essentially the difference between what the buyer paid for the property and what the property is actually worth. And on some occasions, it can result in the actual contract being reversed.
Right. So it could be quite catastrophic if somebody doesn't really tell the truth.
It can be. And there are standard questions relating to the characteristics of a property. For instance, have the boundaries ever been moved to the knowledge of the seller? Are there any planning applications that relate to the property or may affect the property? So it may not actually relate to the property itself, but may affect the property. Have there been any disputes in the past with neighbours? These are all things that a seller needs to be, when asked those questions, need to be very careful about the answers that they give.
Sure. When you say land registry are taking such a long time to register new owners, which I think they are, it can be over 12 months, can't it, as you've just alluded to. How do you get around that when you're asked by lenders to be very clear about who's buying, who's selling, the provenance of the property and the money and all the rest of it? A bit difficult, isn't it?
It can be, but what conveyancers can do in order to speed up that particular part of the process is that a conveyancer can make an application to the land registry to expedite the application that's currently holding up any conveyance. So for instance, imagine if you're a seller of a property and you bought the property perhaps a year ago and it's still not in your name, your conveyancer can make an application to the land registry to get that particular application sped up on the grounds that it needs to be sped up so that you can then sell the property.
Is there a cost to
that? No, there isn't a cost to it, but you do need to provide the land registry good grounds to expedite the application itself.
Right. Nothing's easy, is it?
No, nothing's easy. That's why they get paid well.
Do you have problems with conveyancing times, Nikki?
We do, but this is going to sound awful now. It depends on the conveyancer, to be honest with you. Some conveyancers are quicker, and we've had a case where they've expedited it. And actually, the conveyancer, very luckily, just sat on the phone every day to land registry and spent hours. So although you say there's no cost to it, there is a cost and an element of time, isn't there, to your team, to having to sit there and try and...
You're absolutely right. And lawyers should always be very transparent with their clients in relation to costs. Yes, there is a cost to it in terms of the time spent, but there's not an actual application fee,
Yeah.
I don't think.
I know in London here we suffer a lot from extended times, and quite often it'll be because of family ties and previous kinds. They've used a firm of solicitors that are way out of London, perhaps not used to leasehold properties. And I think one of the suggestions that's recently been made is that if a firm of solicitors wants to do conveyancing, then they must have a specifically qualified conveyancer within the practice, rather than just a sort of general practitioner taking on conveyancing, because it can cause an awful problem, can't it? I mean,
Absolutely, and it's a very complex process.
Yeah.
And depending on the nature of the property, as you said, leasehold property is very different from freehold property.
Yeah.
Different issues arise during the conveyancing process.
Yeah.
The idea, well, the day of lawyers being general practitioners and doing all or every part of the law are gone, and lawyers do specialise nowadays.
Just as well, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, Nikki, we're going to move on to your question, which is, with the apparent lack of success of some of the television advertisement-driven fixed fee estate agencies, that's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Do the panel think that there may be a reversal towards seeing the revival of the smaller agency operations, providing a more bespoke and personal level of service? I think you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
I do, and I think you probably know that there's been a lot of changes recently in the marketplace around online agents versus having normal estate agency as such. I mean, if you look, there was only 5 to 7% of the marketplace anyway that online agents really captured. So,
Do you think they were wrong with their basic business plan, thinking they were going to take the market by storm?
I think people underestimated what agents actually do. So when there was an option to do it really cheap, they didn't think about, if I'm paying that person less money, are they going to be as motivated to get me as much money for the biggest thing that I own? No, they just thought the other way around of, oh, I'm saving money on the fee, but you're losing money on what you're going to get out of the house. And then I think they realised how stressful the process is. And conveyancing, to be fair to conveyancers, sometimes you can have a buyer or a seller that is delaying the process because they're taking ages to come back on queries. So, yeah, and that can have an adverse effect. So that's where, again, agents are really crucial to have a good relationship with conveyancers, that they can pick up the phone and talk to them. So, and I think people underestimated what agents actually do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how many times have we heard the sort of thing, well, all you've done is walk around my house and you've earned yourself tens of thousands of pounds worth of fees? Well, it doesn't quite work like that. People don't appreciate what it costs to put a property on your books, to have the photographers come round, to present it, the portal fees every month. I mean, it's all quite expensive stuff, isn't it?
It's expensive and it's also time consuming. And I think the biggest thing as well they didn't realise is that, or there's the old saying of people buy from people, you're selling your business like asset. So you are giving someone an awful lot of money to look after, in effect. You don't have to like them. You know, you don't have to like your conveyancer. You don't have to like your estate agent, but you have to trust them.
Yes.
If you don't trust them, then you can't, you know, they don't trust they're going to give you the best job. They're not going to give you the best result. Then there's nothing there. And I think the thing is, if you're dealing with a big call center, maybe, and you're passed from one person to another person to another person to another person, you haven't built that rapport with one person to have that trust. Which is what
But
you
I mean,
need.
I suppose it's the same thing as having a car serviced, isn't it? You know, if your franchise dealer is going to be £600, £700, £800 for a service, and there's a guy around the corner who does it for 50 quid, you've got to ask what he's going to be doing for 50 quid. What can he afford to do? And I mean, I've always had I've dealt as a developer with agents, being an agent in the past. I've worked for chartered surveyors, and I just think, actually, do you know what? If an agent can get the result that I want, I don't really care whether it's 2%, 3%, 4%. I don't care. It's what I want. It's the achievement level, isn't it? And I just think with a lot of the online agencies, they underestimated what their negotiators, if you wanted to call them that, were actually able to achieve you know, unqualified people cannot usually get really good results with good properties. They just can't do it. They haven't got the property knowledge. They can't feed you, the lawyer, with enough information. They can't do the backup that agent. I mean, what do they say about selling property? It's very easy to get somebody to say, yes, I'll buy it. It's that process in between that reservation and the conveyancing completion that really matters, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's actually, I think people spend a lot of time focusing on the vendor rather than the buyer, because if you've got a property, that's great, but if you haven't got a buyer, and a buyer that trusts you as well as the vendor that trusts you, the buyer's not going to buy the house.
And of course, you've got the eternal problem of when a buyer goes into an agent, he will naturally assume that the agent's working for him, but they're not. They're working for the vendor.
Yeah.
You know, so it's almost a conflict, isn't it, in a way? So it's quite a difficult balance to achieve, and it's only good agents that can really do that well, I think. Anyway, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show, so join me again after the break when we'll be asking Nikki and Adrian more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined today by Adrian Mcclinton and Nikki Reid. Welcome back. Adrian, what is the fastest and most cost-effective form of dispute resolution with regards to service charge matters?
Okay, so the question itself relates specifically to service charge disputes, but I think it's really important for any party that's going to engage in litigation that they understand that parties are encouraged by the court to engage in pre-action negotiations and correspondence with the other party. And a failure to do so can result in the court looking upon any party in a dim light. The pre-action conduct can consist of roundtable negotiations, expert determination, or alternative dispute resolution. Everything that's said during that process will be on a without prejudice basis, so it can't be held against you in the open court process. So that's generally speaking in relation to all disputes, no matter what the type of dispute is. In relation to service charges, I think it's really important to understand precisely what we're talking about when we talk about service charges. Service charges tend to be the charges that a landlord, or the costs that a landlord has incurred during the maintenance and work on a building.
And running the building.
And recovering that cost via the service charge provision contained in the lease. And then it will also depend upon what type of service charge and what type of lease we're talking about. So we're talking about commercial property. The quickest way to resolve things will be different from a residential property. Typically speaking, commercial properties and commercial leases will have a mechanism within the lease that enables the parties, where there is a dispute, to refer that dispute on service charges to an expert surveyor and go through essentially what is expert determination, where the expert will play the role of adjudicator and determine what service charges are outstanding. That's probably the quickest way. It's really important that anyone that's going to enter into a commercial lease gets advice from a lawyer, obviously, on the content of that lease before they do so. In relation to residential property, this is a bit more trickier because it's difficult for both the landlord and the tenant, the leaseholder, in those circumstances. The landlord has to comply with a whole bunch of legislation that is there to protect the leaseholder, so overarching legislation in relation to service charges. But once the landlord does that, and if the service charges have been reasonably incurred, the tenant can be in quite a difficult position, especially if they're only arguing over a couple of £100, because they could face quite a large legal bill at the end of it that could far outstrip the service charges that they're arguing about. And more often than not, that will go to the first tier tribunal, where the landlord needs to demonstrate that those service charges are reasonable in amount and reasonably incurred.
And those tribunals are pretty good at assessing that, aren't they?
Yes, they are. They're a specialist forum. More often than not, there'll be 3 chairpersons in the tribunal, You'll have a judge, a lawyer, but sometimes you'll have a surveyor or two surveyors that sit and they really know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I mention that is, I mean, only on criminal courts I've been involved with for many years, but I had occasion to see county court judges, and where they do get property matters, sometimes you sit there thinking, actually, I'm not sure you're 100% right. I'm not sure you're 100% on top of the actual problem. And they make very dismissive judgments sometimes. And it can become very difficult. So I'm very much in favour of specialist tribunals, because I think they're necessary. And these service charges are a huge worry to a lot of people. I mean, I think some of the classic things that you get are, perhaps a landlord, he has the right to insure the building and then charge it on the service charge. Is he getting a commission off the insurance company? Well, who knows? He wants the building to look nice to protect his freehold value. Is that your cost or his? Who knows? It's a debatable point. But there's so many areas where it can get a bit distorted. And if you're looking at some of these buildings down here with 500, 600, 700 units in a building, I mean, the service charge budget can be £4 or £5 million a year. So it can be affected quite seriously if a landlord is, shall we just say, being naughty.
Absolutely. I mean, just to clarify, your involvement in the criminal courts, purely, you weren't the defendant, you were acting as a magistrate.
Absolutely.
We're going to clarify that.
Yeah.
Do the best to.
No, they've let me out for the afternoon. Don't
look,
worry.
that's be absolutely clear.
Yeah.
I think the average punter, the average leaseholder, doesn't quite understand the cost involved in maintaining large blocks of apartments. It's eye-watering. And obviously, the bigger the block, the bigger the freehold, the more cost there's going to be. But obviously, it's going to be, hopefully, split equally or fairly amongst all of the leaseholders in that block.
Yeah.
It's, I think a lot of the time, leaseholders don't quite realise how much work's involved. And that needs to be reflected in the service charge.
I think if somebody said to me, do you want to take over the freehold? I'd run a mile. I'd run a mile. And I'm just thinking now, in the block of time living in, we're having front door fire inspections throughout the building. Well, that's 600 of them. If they're only 10 quid a time, it's going to be 6,000 quid. So
I'm glad you did the maths on that.
Yeah, well, I do try. Okay, all right. Well, thank you for that. So I think that the tribunal is the one to be trusted, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. Well, it's the tried and trusted.
Yeah. And you're going to get your specialist there.
Yeah. Tried and trusted.
Yeah. But you're going to get your specialist there. That's
absolutely.
the important thing.
I thought you were trying to say tested. Sorry, that's why I was laughing.
Yeah. I should have.
Okay.
Would have been easier.
Right, you're laughing, Nikki, but here's your question. Right. Which is totally different to the one.
You have no faith in me answering this, do you?
Okay. Right. At this time, property sales seem to be taking longer, mainly due, I guess, to the recent rises in interest rates. What advice or tips would the panel give to a vendor wishing to achieve a quick sale without making a huge reduction in the asking price?
I think that's actually a really easy answer. Because
don't sell it.
Don't sell it, because you've got to sell for different reasons. But it does annoy me because a lot of agents, solution, if a property's not selling, is the first thing, let's just reduce it. We'll wake up Monday morning, ring our client and say, let's reduce it today. A, that's the worst day to reduce a house. But B, reduction isn't always necessarily the right answer.
Correct, yeah.
So the biggest thing is you need to know what your feedback is, because your feedback is what guides you. If you are finding that your feedback is around pricing, then it's price related. If your feedback is around the house feels dark or gloomy or not homely, then you need to look at dressing it if it's not feeling homely and warmly, because buying a home is very, very much about feeling. You have to see it to get that feeling or not. If it's dark, look at more lights, maybe put in some lamps. You've got to work with what your feedback is coming in. But also, there is also now different options available. In particular, a lot at the moment we're finding, because of the marketplace, is modern auction method. So you can go down the modern auction method as well. We've actually recently done it on a property. I'm going to shoot myself now, aren't I? Sorry, because he told me not to say it, but I'm going to do it anyway. tempting fate, touch wood. We've recently done a property.
I'm not sure that's a word. Don't worry.
Don't ever take my advice.
So we've recently done a property. Wasn't selling. Looked at it. It is really a building plot, to be honest with you. So it's ideal for that. So we looked at, what can we do? Can we keep reducing it? Looking at option agreements with clients. That's another option available, which you can obviously put an option on the property purchase. Or what can we do to change it? And we actually switched it round and we actually put it into modern auction method. So we took it off normal sale, put it into modern auction method. We still handle the sale, but it goes to an online auction. We are getting more inquiries and have had offers higher in the modern auction method than when we had it on a traditional sale.
Wow, that's interesting.
So,
but I think, do you know, it never fails to surprise me how little attention people give to presentation. They say, oh, well, it's lived in, we live here, you know, this is how, you know, well, I don't care about that. I want it to look nice. I want to walk in and think, wow, I want this place. You know, I really, really do. And when, you know, the classic agent one is, well, why don't we reduce the price? Do you know what I do? I say, look, whether it's on a new development or a resale home or whatever, I say, well, look, okay, how much do you want me to reduce it? And I say, well, £100,000. Okay, lovely. So that'll take it down to, let's say, £1 million. Just show me what else you've got on your books for £1 million then. Tell me what you're reducing me to.
Yeah.
And let's see if it compares. If it doesn't, then you know the agent is just looking for the easy way out, which is, as you've identified, just it's not right. It's not necessarily the answer, is it? But there we are. I suppose that's the vagrancies of the property market, isn't it? Anyway, good answers. Thank you both very much for coming in today. You've given some splendid answers and been very helpful to our viewers. Thank you for that. So, Nikki Reid, founder of Nikki Homes, thank you for coming. Thank you to Adrian Mcclinton, Principal and Head of Dispute Resolution at MW Law. That's all we've got time for today, so join me again next time on Property Questions.